Good afternoon. Again, this is Karen Mazzo, and I'm here with Ann Mordecai.
Hi.
Hi, great. Hello. Welcome to this webinar. We are glad to have all of you. And this webinar is available both to all of the users of Performance Plus in New Hampshire that have signed up again this year, and then also all of the members that have chosen to join our 21st Century Classroom Consortium. So we welcome you all. And this will be the first of many webinars this year. You should be receiving MailChimps on a regular basis, notifying you for the Performance Plus webinars. There's about 15 Performance Plus webinars that will be offered throughout the year. And then also there's about 15 of the 21st Century Classroom Consortium webinars that we will be offering. So that's looking like a couple of webinars a month that are available to you. And for every webinar, we are attaching a professional development certificate. You can see in the handouts in your control panel that there's a certificate for the workshop, an hour of PD time. And also the webinar is uploaded under handouts in its PowerPoint form, and you're welcome to it. So take advantage of that. And what else?
Questions. If you have questions on your control panel, there's a little spot for asking questions. And I'll be monitoring that. And so if you have questions, please ask.
Yes, and then I will announce them out loud. We generally keep everybody on mute because we notoriously get feedback, nasty, horrible feedback that's disturbing to the audience. At the end of the webinar, though, we will open up for oral questions, all right? So if you want to hold on and you want to have a chat afterwards, then that's great. I think that about covers it. Any other logistics?
I don't think so. I think that's good.
Okay, we're very excited for this school year, and we have a lot of great things planned, both for users of Performance Plus and for the members of our consortium. So we're looking forward to it. Today, we're going to talk about data protocols for educator teams, and this is something that we are very committed to. It's sort of the foundation of our work, and I think it is basically how we got started with demonstrated success. Anne and I have been working for about a decade with training folks all over New Hampshire how to use data protocols, how to use protocols and data in teams, how to team effectively, how to run PLCs, RTI teams, data teams, leadership teams, all sorts of teams that use data. And that's sort of been our area of expertise. So we're glad to offer this at the beginning of the year to help people get organized for their successful data work this year. Okay. So in the work that we've done.
Actually, can I just interrupt? I'm sorry.
Please.
Yeah, I'll talk.
Okay. Go for it.
I just want to make sure people can hear because you never know for sure.
Yes.
If you can hear us, could you type in yes in the question area?
Thanks, Kelly.
Great.
So far, so good. We got one
here, so that's good.
All right, I'm going to keep going then. Thank you, Yulia. It's nice to have you. Okay. So these are sort of the key components that we've identified over the last decade for high functioning teams. And you're going to see this graphic again and again throughout the PowerPoint, and that's intentional so that you have it in your minds. So norms, role, and climate is one extraordinarily important component. We believe in using norms. We believe that everyone on a team should take on a role because it takes a lot of people to keep a team functioning smoothly. And we know that climate is sometimes less tangible than a lot of other things, but it is certainly something that teams need to work on and have clarity around. The second component is the use of consistent protocols. And when we use the word protocols, it's a very broad word for us when we talk about this. It runs from everything from habits, consistent, ongoing habits of a team, sort of the templates that you use, the routines that you have. You want to make those things consistent in order to be effective. And the third component, clear communication plan, is obvious. You want to have clear communication routines, and you want communication to be transparent. You want it to be explicit, sort of explicitly identifying who needs to know what, how the information will be transferred to them, when, how, in what mode, and so on. The fourth, the light blue roundabout, what's about 8 o'clock? Shared and articulated and measurable goals. So let's start with the word articulated. We strongly believe that teams should stop and spend the time to articulate their goals. There's nothing worse than sitting together and for people to be unsure of what the purpose of the team is. So it's important to talk about those before you start and to set shared goals that are articulated collaboratively. In terms of accountability, we think about accountability in a few different ways. So one is staying accountable to each other. What protocols or processes will we have that make it so that we are accountable to each other, so that we can check on each other to make sure that there's been follow through? There's also accountability to, for instance, your building principal. How are building administrators communicating with teacher level teams and vice versa? And the same thing going up into central office. How are building level teams communicating and remaining accountable to the process and policies of central office? And then the final component, the defined timeline throughout, is just that piece of there should be dates attached to all action steps, to processes throughout the year, and so on and so forth. And do you want to add anything to that?
No, I think you'll go, you go into the detail. I may jump in the detail part.
Okay.
But sounds good. Does anybody have any questions so far?
We're here.
Not yet? Okay.
Okay. So the first area that we're going to talk about is norms, role, and climate. One of the things that we've observed over the years is that teachers' time is becoming increasingly thin because the demands on teachers are broadening each year. Teaching used to, it used to be that teaching was sort of the main focus of the day, but now there's a lot of responsibilities that teachers have around technology and data and assessment development and new programs. And so it's even more important that when you do meet, that your time is used effectively. So these protocols that we're going to talk about today, we hope that will help you do that. And it's very important to take the time to establish your norms and your roles and your processes from the get-go. It's sort of that go slow to go fast. The norms that you do create should help create a positive climate, obviously. And, sometimes I think that we overlook norms. We think, oh, okay, I know about the 7 norms of collaboration, and we've been using them for so many years, and so they're not posted, and we don't revisit them. But I know that, they're internalized. But the truth of the matter is you should keep your norms in front of you and visible at all meetings. They should be talked about, and team members should be reminded of them at the start of meetings. While things are going well with your groups, it seems like the norms are not important. And I was joking with a group that I was working with earlier in the week, in September, everybody's fresh and everybody's cheerful and feeling good and, fairly attentive and eager. But by March, right, when SBAC starts and everybody is overworked and busy, people's behaviors in teams can change. And if you've kept the norms sort of paramount in your interactions all along, then it's easier to rein your group back in if things start going astray. So I do think it's important to keep them very prominent. What we sometimes do is have folks monitor a single norm per meeting, just so that throughout the course of the year, you can get feedback around each and every norm and fully understand all of the norms that you've set.
And not only in March, but even at the beginning of the year, there's, in some teams, there's a teacher who takes over or an administrator who takes over. And if you've got the norms defined as everyone gets a chance to talk, you can call that person on it without, hopefully without stepping on toes. It helps that process.
Well, and when you have the norms monitor, you can actually provide the norms monitor, which is a role, can provide that feedback around that particular norm even in a more general way. So it just depends on the dynamics of your team, how close you are, how experienced you are together, how personal you can get. What else? Anything you want to add to that, Anne?
Nope.
I think that it's really important climate-wise that if there is a leader or administrator involved in your team, or if there's any sort of hierarchical piece, if it's principals and teachers or superintendents and principals, that it's always a good idea for the leader to initiate conversation, but then to remember to step back to get the feedback and the input from other folks. So we have here on this slide the norms of collaboration, which I'm sure that everyone who's on the webinar is familiar with. And what we have advocated is to use the norms of collaboration as sort of an outline or a piece to share before you establish your own norms. The components in the norms of collaboration are strong components for any team, and we've all used them, but sometimes it pays to have conversations and to go through a protocol to establish your own norms, and we have a protocol for that. The document to the right is a document where we've outlined the more useful roles that we've come across. So, for instance, it's facilitator, recorder, file keeper, timekeeper. This is actually only one page of this document. It goes on to talk about the materials manager and the artifacts collector. Sometimes you might want to include somebody who brings food. What else? All of the documents that you're seeing today are all uploaded, and you have access to them, and I'll show you where to get them at the end of the webinar. So this is a protocol for establishing your own norms, and this is one of many, many, many protocols. It involves sort of everyone collaborating together to use index cards, to write about their own behavior in meetings and their behavior of colleagues, and then put them all together and basically having a conversation about that. Another way I've had folks start to create norms is, the question of, well, what are your peeves? What are your pet peeves at meetings? What's frustrating to you? What do you want to avoid? You own this meeting. It's yours, with your team. So let's make it what we want it to be. And then we start off by talking about the frustrations that people have had at meetings. Or you could start off with your personal weaknesses at meetings. For instance, I have a problem sometimes paying attention. So, and that's a good place to start too, because it doesn't place blame, and you're it's always safe to be self-effacing. Anne, anything to add?
No, I always worry that people don't think of the norms as important because, sometimes meetings just run smoothly, and they really are. They're very
Sometimes,
important.
yeah, sometimes they do just run smoothly. But I have to say, in more instances than not, even if they're running smoothly, there's often at least a couple of people in the room that are frustrated and no
Yeah.
one knows that they're frustrated. Either because people are getting off task, they're not staying to an agenda, they're starting late, there's side conversations, folks are on their phones, folks are on the internet. There's all sorts of things that can go unspoken. And if you leverage your norms, then you can get the meeting and the team behaviors that you want. Agreed, Anne?
Sounds good.
All right. So this is just going back to, I've sat in meetings, and I think we all have, where no one actually knows the purpose of the team. And I want to encourage all of you to take the time to articulate your team purpose. When we work with schools around PLCs, the very first thing we talk about is, what is the purpose of this PLC team? What's our goal? What's our purpose? What's our job? And how do we know when we've been successful? And if you can answer that collaboratively, you're going down the right path. So this is a protocol to make that happen. And again, you can access that protocol, and I'll show you how after the webinar. So we've been talking all along so far about consistent protocols, but I'm going to introduce you to a few more that are important for the work that's done on different teams. One thing that we really want to emphasize is that we believe that you don't have to be a PLC team to be a data team. That there are many, actually most school teams, right, are using data at some point and can use data more effectively to make the decisions that they need to make. So if it's a student assistance team, right, you're using individual student data. If you're a professional learning community, you might be using grade level or content area, aggregate data. If you're an administrative team at a district level, you could be using either of the two that I just mentioned. You could be using longitudinal academic data. You could be using culture and climate data. So we believe that most teams that work in schools should be using data at some point. So a lot of our protocols sort of revolve around data use. Using consistent protocols and encourages a trusting culture. It allows people to anticipate what's going to happen. It encourages a feeling of safety and efficiency and accountability and effective use of time, all of which are confidence building and calming for busy teachers and administrators. Communication is much better when you use consistent protocols. It's important to not get overly fixated on specific templates and protocols, however. So understand that you can change your protocols as you move through the year as a team. If you start with a template, let's say you decide to use some of the templates that we're offering you today, feel free to take it, morph it, recreate it as fits your needs. Teams, okay, they have different opinions about how they want things to run. And that's a collaborative decision-making process. But we really encourage you to take the time at the beginning of your team formation to get your routines and your protocols in place, because it'll pay off in the end. So one thing that is fairly obvious, but it's a decision that has to be made. How are you housing your team artifacts and your materials? We've been finding, 5 or 6 years ago, there was a binder. And that was great. There was a binder that was kept in a communal room. And when the team came in, You would take out your binder, you would find last week's notes, you would review them, and so on and so forth, and whatever else was in that binder. But lately, more and more folks are using a communal folder on a Google Drive, which I think is very effective. For instance, for PLC teams at a school, each PLC team has a grade level folder, and within that grade level folder for each meeting, there is a separate folder into which various artifacts, notes, etc. are uploaded. It's important, and this is another thing to take your time in doing, that all of the people on the team can access the folder in Google Drive. For some of us, it's like second nature, and for other people, it helps to have direct instruction on how to get there and how to upload things, and it's worth it in the end, because the more people that know how to get to your materials and then know how to do things on your team, the more shared responsibility for all the different things that have to happen to keep your team intact and functioning effectively. Anne, did you want to add anything?
I was going to try and create a poll on this through the webinar, but I can't figure out how to do it. So I'm just going to ask a question. Maybe you could just answer if you want to answer. I'm just curious, how many people have teams that they look at, or how many people look at data in teams is my first question. So if you want to answer that, type in 1 yes or no. And then do you have some protocols that you follow, or do you just wing it as you're going and not wing it, but not quite sure where you're going or how you're doing it? So question 1 is, do you look at data in teams? And question 2 is, do you have some protocol that you follow so the whole school is doing the same thing? I get some yeses. We look at data. A few of those.
And yes, we have protocols that we follow.
And some, yep.
Okay, and another one. Great.
Yeah.
That's terrific.
Yep.
Thank you.
Okay. No. There are no no's, but I'm not sure if those people aren't responding or everybody's looking at data and everybody's got protocols. That'd be interesting.
I wanted to talk about, for instance, in the PLC folders when we work with teams, there's a lot of different items that can be uploaded into your PLC folder. And that, again, is a team decision that you're going to want to talk about. Of course, you're always going to want to upload your notes. You probably want...
Wait, I'm sorry. It's a team decision or it's a district decision or school decision.
That's true.
I mean, every school could decide they need to have certain documents. Every district could.
Thanks, Anne. Yes, because we have worked with all of the above. We have worked in schools where it becomes the team decision, and that was part of the way that a principal encouraged ownership of that particular grade level team. We've also worked in districts where there were expectations that were established from central office and that filtered down into all of the buildings. That's frequently the case in larger districts, and it can be done any which way. So that's a good point. But these are some of the potential items to get you thinking about your team drives and your team folders, to get you thinking about what you want to house in your team folders. And it seems simple and obvious, but when you're doing it, it's actually not. So you can, right? So when we talk about sample ideas for team norms, you may upload norms of collaboration or something off of, I can't remember the name of that site, but I will remember it. But I'm sure a lot of you on the webinar know it. Solution Tree, and then there's the National Reform Faculty. That's what it is. They have a lot of protocols. And the specific PLC norms or the team norms that you've developed, you can upload the team roles and then the team roles that you've assigned, year-long SMART goal worksheets, right, for your team. Now, if you're a team that's working on curriculum or you're creating assessments, you might want to upload a copy of the Common Core standards for your particular content area. And if you've done any work around breaking down those standards, you probably want to upload that. If you're a team, or if you're a building rather, that I know lots of buildings I've worked with have actually identified priority standards, then you might want to upload that information. Or if you're working on competencies and you need to upload, and so that everyone's going to need to access the grade level competencies or the course competencies when you're creating assessments, that can be put into your team folder. It should be uploaded. If you have curriculum maps, you can upload those, or if they're on your website. I mean, the key here is to keep things easily accessible, right? So anything that your team will need to access quickly in order to be efficient, it's a good idea to put that onto your team, into your team folder. At the bottom here, this is more PLC oriented, cycle checklists, or your notes, or information around a particular assessment that you're looking at, and the data that you've possibly looked at. Either you can upload a PDF of the data that you're looking at from Performance Plus, or if you're looking at spreadsheets, you can upload those into your team folder. What I often do with PLC teams when we've done a data dive is, if they've reported out on chart paper, then the artifacts manager will take a picture of it at the end of the meeting and date it and upload that into the appropriate dated folder for that meeting, so that folks can go back and look at the evidence of that conversation. The tools that you use when you are looking at data, such as the Data Dialogue template, and you're going to see some of these later in the webinar, or the directions to carry on a data dialogue, a data-driven dialogue. So this is sort of a potpourri of the potential items that you'll want to put in your folders, in your team folders, depending on the work that you're doing. Anne, did you want to add?
I was going to wait till you're done with the documentation part of this, but I could say it now, I guess. A couple people wrote that they do have protocols in their schools, but they don't necessarily follow them, or they don't know how to follow them. And people wrote different things, but that's pretty common. So don't feel alone in that. But it's without buy-in and enforcement, it's not going to happen. If nobody's saying you have to do this and checking on it, there just isn't time to do it. So really the only way a protocol is going to be followed is if administration has buy-in to it and also checks it, follows up on it.
And you're given regular time to meet,
and you are given time to
carry out the processes that you need.
Right.
All right. Here we go. So, yes.
Sorry, somebody has said they lost audio. Has everybody lost audio? I hope not. If you can hear, can you just type yes? Just a couple people. Anybody?
Yeah, because it's one person who's reported that they lost audio.
Yeah. Yeah, so people can hear. So I'm sorry. It's got to be something with your computer. Sorry.
Kelly, you might want to go out and come back in.
She can't hear us. I'll tell her.
Yes, of course. She can hear us. Okay. Sorry, everybody. All right. So I just want to, in terms of managing materials for success, this is just an example. I wanted to talk a little bit about your note-taking protocols. So again, this is something that seems obvious, but folks struggle with the template for taking notes. Do you make it a running template where you just paste, you take your notes and then you paste a blank template on top of that and you keep going and you house that for the year, and then you have an ongoing note-taking document? That is one thing that some of the people that I have worked with prefer. I don't prefer that. I like to take the notes from the meeting and put them in the dated folder. and house it there so that if you need to go back, you can do so. I've designed a note-taking template that I think will keep people on track and efficient. I'm sure that it can be improved. If you come up with some great improvements for it, let me know. So I have posted the team norms, sort of made up norms on the top of the template so that they're always prominent and in front of us. The meeting date, who's there, what their role was for the meeting, and that adds for accountability because then you know what they were responsible for, right? The norm that was monitored so that you can keep track of that. And then always starting your meetings with an update on whatever folks were supposed to do from the previous meeting. And I'm realizing that I'm going to go through this protocol later in the webinar, and it's cut off here. So we'll go later when it comes up again. I'm going to have all the sheets and be able to show it to you. Anne, are we okay with questions?
Yeah.
Okay. And this is just showing you an example of a PDF that was printed from Performance Plus of data that a team looked at. So I'm just showing you how it's easy. You just press the PDF icon and you can save it as a PDF and then upload it to your folder. Okay. So here's some more examples of protocols. And one thing that you might want to do as a team, if you think it's necessary, is if you see on the left, there's a protocol inventory. And you could sit down at the beginning of your year together and go through the protocols that you have and what their purpose is and the intended audience and who is responsible for the oversight of that particular protocol or routine, and where documents are stored. So feel free to use that as an organizational tool. Another protocol that I've used a lot, and this is usually for larger teams and for important decision making, and I'm sure many of you have heard of it, is the FISTA 5 voting and consensus protocol. It's a neutral consensus building process. It works really nicely. And, there's a lot of different ways to get consensus. And you can see in the bottom left some tools, some resources. So the FISTA 5, there's a link there. And I had mentioned earlier the National School Reform Faculty Protocols. And the Hyper Island Toolbox is actually a site that is a personal site for me. They're full of creative protocols to use with teams. And it's not...
And you don't have to write these down because...
No, the PowerPoint is attached.
So you can, if you download the PowerPoint from the handouts.
Thanks, Anne. But the Hyper Island Toolbox is it's a fun location to find things to do with teams that are collaboration building, energizing protocols. It's fun. Okay. I better move along. So we were talking about data use and how important we think that is. And so we just wanted to put this up there and review with you the data use cycle, right? The definition of what you need to explore, collecting and analyzing data, prioritizing and focusing on a goal, developing your action plan, implementing your action plan, and assessing the effectiveness of your plan, right? So that's the data cycle, and our protocols revolve around that, many of our protocols. This is a data inventory. And the very first thing we often do when we work with teams is, particularly teams that are going to be looking at data for a specific purpose, what data do we have? What do we have to look at, right? When is it given? So we need to know, when is it available to us to leverage? Who are we collecting data on and for and about? What kind of data is it? Is it formative? Is it summative? You can also write about whether it's question-based data or there's no questions. How detailed is the data? Where is the data stored? And what's the condition of the data? There's nothing worse than wanting to use data that isn't usable when you need it. So it helps to think ahead and think, okay, so we have this Fontes and Pinnell data. It's given in the fall, but you know what? We haven't been storing it in a way that's usable. It's not on an Excel document, or it's not in Performance Plus. But you know what? We want to look at it on this date. So we better plan ahead and put it into a form that we can actually use it. And then
it also could show you that you're giving an assessment every year that nobody ever looks at the data. And so should you be looking at the data, or maybe just stop giving the assessment?
Right. Or the data inventory could reveal that you're collecting an awful lot of data on the same information.
Yeah.
Right. So it's very informative to move through this data inventory process with your team. And it can be used for immediate purposes, like, okay, we're going to be looking at data, so we want to know what we have. But it's also sort of an umbrella question for a district or a school, to make sure that your data processes aren't repetitive and that you're collecting data around what you need. Are we collecting data around the priority standards that we've established? All right. We have a protocol that we use to analyze data in a team, and these are the phases of that, and we call it the DataDriven Dialogue. There's a 5-page detailed description that any facilitator can use to work through this process. This is the summary of those steps. It involves prediction, observation. So folks predict what they think they're going to see in the data. They ask questions. They talk about to themselves first. And then you share out. So that in all of the different stages, there's a silent phase where folks sort of can go inside themselves and think about what they're expecting to see, what they'd like to see. And then you report out to your group and you share and you make it visual to your whole team. And there's a note taker, and usually you do it on big poster board. So phase 2 is you're just observing the data and writing things down and sharing out what pops out or what is surprising to you, or just what's significant. And then the inference is then, well, why do we think this is happening? What are some reasons? What are some possible causations? What is some possible causation? And then the last is action steps. Okay, so what do we need to do about what we've discovered and learned? So that's an important protocol for us.
Can I just give an example of not following that protocol?
Yes.
I was working with a school recently, and they wanted to look at their data and pick a goal from it, which was the purpose of looking at a goal for improving instruction. And so they looked at the data, and they wrote to me. They did this on their own. They emailed and asked me about the particular goal that they picked, and it was based on some standards, some ELA standards. And these standards were really complicated standards. So it looked like they had just picked whatever was the lowest scoring section of the assessment without really thinking about, wow, what are some prerequisite skills? They don't even have the prerequisite skills for this, because those scores were low too. So they just sort of looked at it and went over it really quickly. This protocol helps you slow down and, think about it and look at it, and not just rush in and say, okay, oh, this looks bad, let's fix it. So it helps with the slowing down. I think if there's any reason to use it, that's the reason.
And also it helps you to articulate more clearly what you're seeing in the data. It's amazing to watch how when you get with a group who's never used the protocol before, when they need to articulate their observations, how much better they get over time at pulling out key observations and talking about the data in a way that's going to make it useful and applicable. So we're advocates. Okay. So let's talk about communication plans. Basically, you need to make your communication explicit You need to identify all of the stakeholders and who needs to know what. And you need to establish in any team, right, common understanding. That's why, that's why you have to show up. Team members, it's super important that team members show up. It's super important that teams decide on how they're best going to communicate. And this is just a small detail, but for instance, a lot of times teams assume that folks are going into shared folders and reading notes, or they're going into shared folders to review an agenda before a meeting. And I find that 9 times out of 10, myself included, it doesn't happen. And people are coming in on different pages in different ways with different understandings of what happened at the previous meeting or what the intention is for the day. So, for instance, oftentimes I encourage teams to make it part of their process to email out directly to team members the day before a meeting what were the action steps from the previous meeting and the expectations for the meeting that's coming up, in the form of an agenda. So that's just a small example of how important it is to come to a conclusion and make explicit your plans for communicating as a team. Anne, do you want to add anything to that?
No, I think you got it. You covered it all.
This is just a protocol. These protocols that we're showing you, or these templates, they're all really very similar. We're offering them up to you, depending on whether you need them, just to flesh out, for example, so stakeholder on the left, that's basically who needs to hear the message is the stakeholder. So in this scenario, grade 5 teachers, all of them need to know this information, okay? All of them need to review the goal and describe the standards being taught. The place that it'll happen is at a staff meeting, and I gather from this that John Smith will be doing that communication. And it'll happen on January 24th at the PD day. And this includes, the who needs to know includes parents. The who needs to know includes students, teachers, principals, central office staff. And it all depends on who you are as a team and what your purpose is. Shared, articulated, and measurable goals. Again, going back to that data piece, we think this is super important. Anne, do you want to speak to this slide?
Oh, just about creating goals. To me, that's such a hugely important part of this whole process. And Peter Drucker, who invented modern business management, his belief is that if you can't measure it, you can't improve it. So I'm not sure that's totally true, but in school, I think, if you don't measure it, how do you know if you want to improve it would really be my question. And what gets measured gets improved. I think that's true. You look at it, you measure it, and then you work on it. But the bottom one, I think, is really important. And I said it before, in most organizations, what gets monitored gets done. So if nobody's monitoring the process and nobody's expecting it to be done, it's not going to happen. We don't have time. So,
and I think this also speaks to how imperative it is to identify how you know if you're succeeding or if it's getting done. You have to, when you set out with a goal, part of that process is deciding as a team, how are we going to know if we were successful?
Right.
And this is, repeats a little bit of what we were just saying. That first statement, you get what you measure. Okay, so things get done or student growth happens when you're measuring it. If you're not measuring it, there are so many different competing priorities in our days that the things for which we are held accountable and the things that we are measuring and monitoring are the things that we succeed with or that happen. It's always important to articulate action steps towards whatever goal you've set as a team. And we're going to talk more about setting purpose at the beginning and taking the time at the first few meetings to set that purpose. For example, we're doing some work right now in a district where they're taking the first 3 meetings to establish shared SMART goals, and which are doubling up actually as shared grade level student learning objectives. So in the entire grade level is looking at data, SBAC data from the end of last year and trend data for that particular grade level over the last 3 years, and then marrying that with the current data on their current kids that they have, let's say, via STAR or Fontes and Pinnell, and they are articulating for the year, like the whole 3rd grade, they're articulating for the year an area, be it ELA or literacy or math, and then sort of narrowing down into whether it might be informational text or writing informational text or a specific piece of that or speaking and listening, and they're narrowing down and creating a shared goal around that then each teacher in his or her classroom goes back and works with his or her students around that goal. And it gives them something to reconvene around once a month for their PLC or once a week for their PLC and look at new data around that goal so that they can monitor it throughout the year. Any questions?
No questions. Nope, there aren't any more questions, no.
This is a protocol that is for individual students. So if you were an SAT team and you were working, you had your top 10 heavy hitters, this is a protocol that I've used with high school and middle school teams where, a student, it becomes the focus and a lot of times heavy hitting kids, they have issues in a lot of different areas. It could be absolutely.
I have
what's an SAT team? Oh, sorry, a student assistance team. It could be called something entirely different at your building. But it's very frequent that a student might have behavior issues and academic issues and absentee issues. You would want to collect that student's historical data before you start making any decisions about where to go. So this is just a format for you to do that. The next page of this protocol is a series of strategies and action steps, and then it highlights the person that's responsible for each of those action steps. So for this particular student, they were going to arrange a male student mentor. They were going to inform the teachers to allow that student to leave class, and so on and so forth. And then the final sheet talked about progress monitoring those different action steps and what we observe on a regular basis. This progress monitoring sheet, the date is January 20th. This particular progress monitoring event or meeting on this student, and you might have another one a month later. So that's a template to help with individual student SMART goals. And this is a template. I'm not going to go over SMART goals because I'm sure everybody knows specific, measurable, attainable, results-oriented, and time-bound. That said, as obvious as that seems, for new teachers, you may need to remind and review that process with incoming teachers. This is a process that you can follow to establish team SMART goals. It basically involves thinking about an area that you would like to look into. You're going to use any number of different data sources depending on the area. You're going to look at evidence together. You're going to highlight where you see needs, and then together you're going to articulate a SMART goal. Pretty self-explanatory. So in terms of accountability, we've talked about this as we've moved throughout the webinar. It's important to keep each other accountable. It's important for principals to be accountable to their teacher teams and for teacher teams to be accountable to principals and assistant principals and building leadership. it goes both ways. And similarly up to at the district level, right? District leaders need to give principals and building leaders opportunity to share what's going on at their building teams and receive feedback on that work. So it's a cyclical and responsive process, holding ourselves and colleagues and staff accountable for the work that they're doing. This is the note-taking template that I talked about before, and it's designed to encourage accountability within a team. You see that we start meetings updating on previous action steps, so we're always revisiting our commitments. On the bottom of this particular page, this I designed to make sure that PLC teams were actually doing PLC work, so that we're differentiating between having a team meeting where we might be talking about an upcoming field trip or a piece of curriculum, that we're differentiating between a team meeting and when we're doing PLC work as a PLC meeting. Because all PLC work needs to focus on data and student growth. And so you really have a defined number of menu items for the work that you're going to do in a PLC. So if you look on the bottom, you're either going to be observing student data or forming conclusions and action steps around that data, because it may be a carryover from a previous meeting. You might be creating new assessments because you've realized that you don't have the assessments that you need to monitor student progress towards a given goal. You might be scoring student work that you've gotten back from a progress monitoring assessment or a benchmark assessment. You might be taking the 40 minutes or maybe 10 of the 40 minutes or the 45 minutes to celebrate because the kids did so well and they've made so much progress. And you're going to be eating donuts and patting each other on the back and talking about what you did well and talking about what you did in your classrooms. You may be establishing, and this is what we were saying earlier, you may be establishing your team processes, which is important work as well. And you need to take the time to do that. This is part of the note-taking template. And again, this is a familiar form, right? You have your goal. If our goal is our SMART goal, and then we're going to articulate what action are we taking towards that SMART goal, okay? What have we decided on? Or if the goal is to get more information because we looked at data today, but we realized we actually don't have the data that we need to make decisions, the action becomes we need to access and put together the data that we need for our next meeting. Who's the person that's going to do that? Who has access to that data? When is that person going to do that? And that might be by your next meeting date. What materials do we need? You know what? We need the data. We either need it in PDF form on a piece of paper, or we all need access to Performance Plus, or we all need access to STAR. We're going to need to check our access before the meeting. And who needs to be informed? Was Mary not here? We need to let her know. Maybe only the principal has access to the data that we need for our next meeting, so we need to talk to the principal to get it, and so on and so forth.
We have a question. I'm sorry.
Oh, great. We love questions. Yes.
So it seems like a lot of work to do. How many schools do you know of that follow all of this?
So right now, I can, and I won't name them, but in my head, I am currently working with about 15 schools that are doing this. Last year, we worked with probably 30 schools or more that are moving and following these processes. And what about you?
Yeah, it's pretty much the same schools we're talking about, but the big issue is to make sure that you start slowly and that all of this stuff is explained, and you can't just expect teachers to know what they're supposed to do and administrators to know what they're supposed to do without slow introduction to it, and then somebody watching to make sure that it gets done. And when it's followed, we have seen results in student learning. So
You know, and
There are schools that follow it, and it does work.
and what Anne's saying, you know, that's why, again, some of this seems obvious, and it would seem that it was, and yet it is. Almost all of the pieces that we're talking about are pieces that teams struggle with, and that we see it again and again in the schools that we visit. And so it is super important to take the time to implement the routines and the protocols that we're describing. And if it means that your PLC is not looking at data until the second week of October or the first week of October, then so be it if you're a beginning PLC, because it pays to set the foundation. The same with your SAT team or your data team or your district leadership team. It's that go slow to go fast, again, like I said earlier. This is just an image that we use to convey the reciprocal accountability that I was talking about before. We advocate that principals go into team folders on Google Drive and look at them each week or each month or however frequently PLCs are meeting, and then give feedback. You know, either stop into the PLC meeting and say, hey, I was looking at the work that you did last week in PLC, and it looked like you guys did a great job with your data dive. I'm impressed with the conclusions that you came up with. You know, or, hey, I was looking at the observations in your data dive from last week, and, you know, they were very good observations. I think they might be too general for you to act on. And it's the same thing we do with our students. Just the acknowledgement of the work is very important. So we encourage principals to do that in person, or, you know, have a place in the folder maybe where you can write notes. And we encourage teams to ask that of their principals if it's not already happening. And
I'm going to I want to interrupt because it's 4:00.
Okay.
And the webinar's, you know, slated to go 3 to 4. So if you have to go, we totally understand. I don't know how much more is left on this. I can't remember.
About 5 minutes.
Okay. And if you want to stay and can, that would be great. But thank you for joining us, and send us questions if you have any. And at the very end of this PowerPoint, there are our email addresses. So if you download that from the handout section, you will find our addresses.
Yes.
Okay. Sorry.
Okay. 5 more minutes. Promise. Here we go. This slide is it just depicts the similar relationship as I was describing, except at the district level. So there needs to be the same reinforcement from principals to district level leadership. The work from the pictures of the teachers and the individuals on this slide, those are meant to be teams back at buildings. Teams back at buildings are submitting their work and sharing their work with principals. Principals are then bringing that work to district level leaders on a regular basis. That is part of the process, and we've worked with a lot of schools at the district level to formalize that process so that district-wide, all of the schools in the district are using similar protocols and data practices, and that there's a preset schedule and routine for that sharing back to the district level. This is another protocol that you're free to access, where teams once a month or periodically might give to a principal a report on the data conclusions that they're coming to from their data conversations. And again, this is uploaded. I'm going to show you where. And last, this is just talks about the importance of setting timelines. Set dates on everything. Set dates on your action steps. Set dates on your assessment plan. Set dates on when you are reporting to your principal, when your principal's reporting to your central office. Set dates for assessment administration at a district level, at a local level. Very important. And hold to those dates. And this is a protocol to plan those dates, right? And how long things will take. Now, this last document that I have is, and I'll show you how to access it in a second, is basically a rubric that we've developed that you can use with your teams periodically at the beginning of their work together, and then maybe at the middle of their work together, and at the end of their work together. You can use as a team to self-assess yourselves for all of the elements that we just discussed. This is a picture of it. I'm not going to go through the whole thing. But it takes each of the categories in that circle. So each of the categories in this circle, or this sphere, and it gives you descriptors for beginning, developing, deepening, and sustaining performance for each of those categories for your team. Now, to access all of this, don't forget to celebrate with your team. Okay, take time for that. We mentioned that earlier. To access the resources that have been in the webinar, they will be both in the Performance Plus site, on our resource site, and in the consortium site and our resource site. The consortium is the 21st Century Classrooms Consortium. That's the name of the consortium for 17-18. And the Performance Plus Consortium is named exactly as you see on the slide. To the right, where you see the word assets, all of the labels in blue, those are all of the documents that I just showed you, uploaded in the order that I showed them to you. The first is at the bottom, right? So the team level self-assessment is at the top because that was the last one that I just showed you. The norms of collaboration was the first protocol or the first template or document that I showed you. That's at the bottom. These are the directions to go to the demonstrated success site. So we are happy to take you through this. We don't have time now in the webinar. If you want to stay after, we can play with it with you and we can actually share your screen and help you get on. But these are the directions. They're in the PowerPoint. You're going to go to the DS site, demonstratedsuccess.com. There's going to be a member login and you're going to register as a new user. Step 4 is a new step. For those of you that have been on the site before, you're going to actually get an email once you register that's going to ask you to confirm your email address. Once you do that, you're going to return to the member login and you're going to follow the prompts there. Now, number 6, step 6 is important. For the Performance Plus Consortium, for more than half of the state, right? Because more than half of the state have invested in Performance Plus again, there's no code. However, there is a code for the 21st Century Classrooms Consortium, and that's a closed consortium, and you should have gotten that if you are a participant. If you haven't, no big deal. Just email us, and we will send it to you. All right, we are done with the webinar, only a few minutes over. I am going to open up for questions now for a little while. Ann and I will stay online. And we're here to help you and answer your questions. So I'm going to go to attendees and I'm going to unmute everyone.
That'll be interesting.
That will be interesting. Yes. You may get some funky sound, and if that happens, we'll have to mute you again. You'll have to write your answers in. Okay. There's only about 8 folks left. So you are now officially unmuted. If you would like it, yeah. Has any questions? You also need to be alerted that you're unmuted in case you have.
And you can send your questions too on the question panel.
Yeah.
And know that you can email us or call us too.